This is a very interesting case as well. And Laura already highlighted the question of vaccination. And Paul is going to describe a situation where a BVD-free herd gets ruined by the introduction of BVD. This herd, from what I understand, is in a fairly dangerous environment. And Paul's conclusion focuses in the question to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. Please, Paul.
Okay, Paul, are you there? Oh, I can see you.
Yes, I am here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And yes, thank you very much, Laura, for setting up my case scenario. I would quite happily take your 9 PIs that you found in exchange for the numbers I'm about to quote. So I grew up in the countryside in Northern Ireland. My first encounter of BVD was in mucosal disease in cattle that my father was rearing. I was at the RVC where I graduated in 1998. And at that time, Joe Brownlee was professor of pathology. And anyone who knows anything about BVD will recognize that name. So I learned my BVD from him. I'm currently a self-employed veterinary consultant, and I'm also a farmer. These aren't my cows. I have sheep, but I do work regularly on this farm, both in the veterinary capacity and on the farming capacity. So if we'd like to move on. The farm itself is situated on the coast in Northern Ireland. And I just carry on clicking through the pictures. And the farm itself is surrounded by a coast on 3 sides. And keep clicking, thank you. It is a well-run farm, modern range of buildings that have been built, and the majority have either been built or refurbished in the last 10 years. There's just short of 700 acres being farmed, and they have 250 cows. All the calves are reared through from birth on the farm, either to slaughter for beef or retained as heifers for replacements. In the last 5 years, there's only been one small batch of store cattle bought in for beef production. So it's pretty much a closed herd. Cows are generally housed all year round, and maybe some dry cows get a wee run out in the second half of the summer. Block calving starts in August and runs through the winter. Family owned and run. There's 1 full-time employee and multiple part-time staff. Okay. So the farm joined the Northern Ireland scheme when it became compulsory in 2016. And for the first year, we had over 200 calves born, and all the tag tests came back negative. The main vet from Clare Vets that was managing the health on the farm did recommend to the farmer the importance of vaccination. But the farmer, after discussion and contemplation, declined to vaccinate for BVD. He had a year's worth of tests that had all said that there was no BVD on the farm, so he didn't see any need to spend money on the vaccine. 2017, we started calving in August, and we had 58 calves come through that were negative. And the next slide. Next slide. And then there was a problem. I remember the morning I got a phone call. Sorry, jump one. I remember well the morning when I got the phone call from the farmer to tell me that around the first 21 positive animals. And could we go back? Is it possible?
Back to here?
No, that one. That's the one. Yeah. So we had 21 calves that were positive. And obviously, the farmer was somewhat distraught by getting this text, because it comes through initially as a text message from the BVD scheme in Northern Ireland, which is followed up by an email or paper copy of the record of all the positive results. And there's the first page of 9 pages that came through that week is there for you to see. The cows were looking well. Most of them were doing well. A few were slightly, shall we say, slightly misshapen around the head area, the eyes area, but the majority looked well and were doing well. Farmer was reluctant to euthanize anything at that stage, and we blood sampled 14 of them, and all returned a strong positive. So we can move on, please. Scale of the problem. we carried on over the next month with another 26 positive results, as well as not insignificant collateral damage. There was a lot of infection, respiratory tract infection, gastrointestinal infection in the calves that had tested negative. Everyone was just generally sick. There were a couple of cases that were convinced was acute BVD, including a hemorrhagic syndrome, which died. The BVD or the BVD negative calves that took respiratory disease of any form were very hard to treat, and we lost a lot more of them than we would normally expect to lose in young calves with respiratory disease. So we probably lost well into the 50s of calves between the positive calves that we euthanized, as well as collateral damage from circulating disease within the herd. Just move on another slide, please. So where did it come from? The nearly closed herd, there was only one purchase of stock, and they were reared for beef. They didn't come onto the main farm. They didn't come into the yard. Literature commonly suggests that movements of livestock, including boundary contact, are top of the list of bringing the disease into herds, followed by personnel movements and machinery and equipment. The small map shows you the layout of the land that the farmer farms on a coastal strip 9 miles long and about 6 miles wide. All those blue dots indicate blocks of land that is used by the farm. And if anyone's really interested, I can get you the picture later so you can see the scale of the problem we have. On a rough count, I reckon there was 40 farms adjacent to one boundary or another on the farm. So boundary contact was going to be a significant issue. Personnel movement, a number of all the staff that work on the farm work elsewhere. They either have their own farms or they work on part-time multiple farms. The use of equipment, trailers were shared, slurry tankers were shared. The contracting business was run out of the yard where all the cattle were housed. So multiple potential sources of entry of the infection. We have the next slide, please. So the boundary fences, we hear over the last number of months, we've heard no end of talk of social distancing and maintaining 2 meters distance between ourselves, and certainly our colleagues at Animal Health Welfare Northern Ireland throughout the BVD scheme have been talking about the importance of maintaining boundaries, and those were just typical boundaries. Those 2 hedges that we had in the previous picture were typical boundaries on the farm and typical of most of the farm boundaries in this part of the countryside. They just about stop livestock, but they're certainly not going to stop any viruses. Once into the yard, it was going to be easy for this virus to get around the entire farm. All the buildings, apart from, at the time, all the buildings where livestock were housed, apart from one, were under one continuous roof structure. It was multiple buildings built over many years and then refurbished and buildings fitted in between, and then walls knocked down between buildings to allow for easy flow of cattle and easy flow of people, but that also allowed for very easy flow of virus. We have our bulling heifers, our milking cows, and our young stock all under effectively one roof. And that's just continuous tin, continuous airspace, and continuous airflow around the entire farm. So once any virus got in, it was easy for it to get around the entire farm. Can we have our next slide, please? So looking at the potential source of infection, looking at the dates of when animals were served and when first PIs were born, we backtracked through the records and assigned nominal risk ratings to the various different items that we had, or the various different potential sources. And we decided that probably bringing the bulling heifers, which had summer grazed for 2 seasons, away from the farm in an area surrounded by beef rearing cattle and other farms. They came back in to 2 pens right in the middle of the whole unit. And we reckon that was probably the batch that came in. They probably brought in as TIs, the disease into the herd. They probably were mostly immune. Very few heifers actually had PI calves. But once was on the farm, between personnel moving from shed to shed, AIing cows in one shed, AIing heifers, not changing our boots or waterproofs or anything. Yes, we changed gloves, but nothing else. It was going to be a very short time before it was going circulating around the entire herd. And the next slide, please. So vaccination was started immediately, and 2018 and 2019, all calves have tested negative. Vaccination will continue. We'd like to move on. So costs. The cost in production, we basically lost one full line of heifers, so 19 aside parlour. The mates of those heifers that survived, that weren't PIs, were currently at, when I wrote this, we're averaging 34 litres a day. At that time, that was worth £174 a day. We also lost 28 beef animals with the disposal costs of all of the PIs plus the collateral damage. And we spent an awful lot of money on antibiotics and vet time trying to keep the other calves that were transiently infected and infected by concurrent disease, trying to keep them alive. Next slide. So there's also a human cost, and this is not very commonly mentioned in BVD literature. It's sometimes mentioned in bovine TB literature, certainly a lot of it after the foot and mouth outbreaks in the UK in 2001. This is George, he's the farmer, and he talked freely on video, which some people may have seen, we have access to if we need to, he talked freely about his mistake in disregarding the advice to vaccinate. He also talked freely about how he was devastated by what was going to happen. When you're getting text messages like that at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, which for some strange reason is the time that the computer sends them out, it seems to send them out overnight every time. So 4 o'clock in the morning, your phone goes off and tells you you've got 20 PIs. And a few days later, you get the same message again, and then again. When was going to stop? Was this going to go through the whole herd? Was this going to carry on? We were only at the start of calving 250 cows. Luckily, it blew itself out very quickly. It went around the herd very, very quickly and stopped again nearly as quickly as it started. But it was a very stressful, it was a very worrying time. It took an emotional toll on the family and family life. And the next slide. George's wife, Roberta, added, for somebody not as mentally well as yourself, George, the results could have been detrimental. George had emotional support. He has a wife, he has a family, and he's got a good team of workers around him. But many lone farmers could have suffered an awful lot more. Farmers are not known for talking about their emotions, and there should be support there for them. It's something to bear in mind, particularly as we go onto farms and diagnose big outbreaks of these sorts of conditions, that we can walk away and we're leaving somebody behind whose livelihood's potentially in tatters. So it's something as a profession in Northern Ireland we're getting better at doing. We're resourcing our vets with phone numbers of places they can contact and information they can leave on farms. So maybe it's something we can also tie into the BVDzero approach to make sure we look after the human cost as well as the animal cost. Next slide, please. So there were many risk factors. Vaccination is essential in many situations. And really, if you've got a land border with any country that's got BVD, either in domestic or in wild animals, vaccination is essential. I've seen some drafts coming out of the EU about health eradication programs, and part of that would be cessation of vaccination to prove that you had a zero level of certain diseases. It's going to be incredibly risky unless the entire Latin mass of Europe and well into Asia is clear of BVD if we're going to stop vaccinating. Cost is not only measured in pounds, dollars and euros, or animal health and animal welfare. There's a human cost as well. And the next slide, please. We've seen a slide like this already. This is a PI. This is one we didn't manage to shoot. I didn't manage to shoot. I don't know how I managed to miss it. With 50-something numbers trying to be read off ear tags, it's probably inevitable that somebody got missed. This calf is standing in a batch of calves 1 year younger than it is. The last picture of the calves were a few months, were born on the same day. These calves were born a year apart. BVD calves, 90% will die, 10% may live, but they're certainly not going to thrive and they're not going to get any favours. So please keep shooting them. And the final slides, please. So thanks to George and Roberta for the farm, Michael at Clare Vets, and to Animal Health and Welfare for their BVD scheme. Thanks to Holly Kernot, my fiance, for all of the photography, videography, and the interviews. And final slide, thank you all very much for attending today's seminar. Thank you very much to Boehringer for organising the event.
Thank you. And again, congratulations.
Thank you, Paul. And I have one question for you here.
Yep.
Were you able to put a rough financial cost of the outbreak together?
No, we didn't add it all up. I don't know whether George in his head ever did or the accountant ever did, but you've got, again, it's where you draw the line, because by now those heifers should be in the parlour. They should also have left 18, well, let's be optimistic, 18 heifer calves. Their heifer calves should now be 6 months old. Do we count that? How far along do we keep counting the cost? But yes, we're probably talking tens of thousands of pounds for the sake of a couple of thousand, or maybe not even a couple of £1,000 worth of vaccine.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you say, human cost is not possible to calculate. Thank you again.
Okay.